everybody. Welcome back to the gallery. Really excited today to have Mike Jones of Science. I've said this a lot, but if you are in the studio world and you haven't been living under a rock, you definitely know this studio. You probably know Mike. Really excited to dig into his full backstory today. We're going to cover a whole bunch of topics, everything from his personal story to how science has evolved and been structured over the years to a couple of portfolio companies, two of which you definitely know, Liquid Death, Dollar Shave Club, some big case studies in the studio world. For anybody listening, this is going to be a pretty wide and exciting deep dive. Mike, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you. So, quick to start off, give us the introduction and what led you from your, growing up to ending up at Science and getting that off the ground to now being in Aspen.
Sure. Let's see. So the quick overview would be I was born in Philadelphia, but I grew up most of my life in Oregon. I met my wife at University of Oregon freshman year, fell in love, started building businesses. And over the period of time, I probably built 4 or 5 different companies from starting in college to after college. Moved to LA, continued my career building and selling businesses, kind of sold one of the more predominant businesses to AOL, and finally had kind of like a real job of, not being an entrepreneur and not hustling my way through life. And I used AOL as a master's class in business growth. And so I spent a ton of time learning everything there was to know about a big company as much as I could absorb. Stayed there for 2 years, came out, then began angel investing. And at that point, there was very few investors in LA, angel investors in LA. So got very connected early stage LA startup scene, joined a private equity firm, helped buy and sell companies again, kind of developing skill sets around M&A and transactions. Was recruited to go run MySpace. When MySpace was distressed, I was seen as a strategic operator that could maybe help. It was a really obviously difficult journey, a few years at MySpace, as you'd imagine. And then wanted to go back into the startup world, but wanted to work on kind of an operational investor level, thus the studio structure, and founded Science with 3 other partners, Peter Pham, Greg Gilman, and Tom Dare, essentially 2011.
Okay, so 2011, definitely an early, quote unquote, early era for the startup studio world. I mean, Looking back, when you guys were getting started, was there a model, like take Idealab, for example? Was there another studio that you guys were like, oh, we love what they're doing, we want to do that? Or was this pretty bright-eyed and like, oh, no one's really doing this thing, we want to try to create something new here?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time talking to the founder of Idealab and the founder of Betaworks, so Bill and John, and understanding, and a bunch of their investors, on how they were structured, how they operated, what they did successfully, what they didn't. And we kind of crafted our own version, which is essentially what Science is, but definitely took a lot of pointers from them. And I still think Idealab has the greatest track record of companies they've taken, co-founded with founders, founded themselves, brought public, probably more so than anyone in history. They really do hold really, really high marks. Idealab's a pretty remarkable entity built really around Bill Gross. Yeah. Science came up with our own version of it. And as you're saying, we co-found companies at the early stages and have been doing it for, 12 plus years now.
What were the elements from Idealab and Betaworks that you were like, oh, that we have to do that? And then what were the pieces you're like, that's interesting, we're going to do it our own way?
Well, when you think about any of these studio structures, there's typically a few defining points. So one is the studio team creating the concepts from scratch, or are they funding other people's businesses? Are they co-building with the founder, or are they building their own? That's a big question.
Yeah.
The second question is, are they maintaining majority control over the companies, or are they launching them into venture land and taking active board roles, right? And the third one is, how much is consolidated as far as resources go? Are you creating a giant pool of shared designers and developers and business development experts, back office, legal, finance, accounting, etc.? Or are you pushing those operational components at the studio, at the company level, so they don't rely on the studio? And those kind of 3 things kind of define, what type of studio in essence you're running. So our choices are that the majority of companies we do as a co-founder with somebody else. It's really their idea. We might have expertise in the sector, but they're fundamentally the visionary behind the business. We're here to support them. We wrap our arms around them. We give them every resource we can. Every once in a while, we do our own concepts, but the majority of ideas are other people's concepts. On the second piece is we're always in the minority. Like we don't want to be 51% controlled. We want a large double-digit minority position in these businesses. We do it through co-founding, we do it through capital, right? And the third piece is we provide certain resources in a consolidated pool, but our goal is for all those companies to exist, excluding science, with their own resources, their own expertise internally. There's no long-term reliance on any science operational components. That was the way we chose to kind of mix the studio.
Got it. So I remember pretty vividly, I think it was 2016, 17, the Dollar Shave Club video went super viral. It was that commercial. Mm-hmm. And then I got into Studio World in 2017, and it was like, oh, wow, like Dollar Shave, I know those guys. Like I started shaving a few years ago. I got that product, and I came out of a studio. That's interesting. And, I think that from the outside looking in, I'd love, your perspective on this, of what was going on behind the scenes. We see Dollar Shave, and a few years later, we see Liquid Death do it again, and Rover, same deal. It's like really damn good media, very provocative stories, really understanding culture and the zeitgeist and social media. There's a cool factor. You're probably, humbly, I think you're probably the coolest guy who's been on this show yet, between the snowboards, the Daft Punk helmet, the Liquid Death trucker hat. You're just a cool guy. Okay. And then you're in Los Angeles, where there's a huge media presence. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, cool. All right. So you get four guys in a room they understand all those pieces. You put them in the center of the universe when it comes to media, and they go build startups together. Pretty damn good ingredients at play. Probably high likelihood for success. Was that all strategic, or was it just sort of like the way it ended up and a little more random?
I mean, it wasn't random. I'm not sure it was strategic. I think what we, in the early days, and we had, our first fund was both Rover, which, just sold for $2.4 billion, and Dollar Shave Club at $1 billion. So we had two really big companies come out of that we essentially co-founded with the founders. Maybe we were big advisors versus co-founders. You can figure out the language, but we're heavily operational at the early stages, right? Yeah. I think what we're looking at is we're looking at trends. We're listening to people. We're understanding the way culture is moving, and we're trying to find things that fill the need of kind of the next movement in culture. At that point, the early stages, there was obviously this movement to direct to consumer. There's a really positive arbitrage environment with paid media that could work really well with subscription services. Mm-hmm. With Rover/Dog Vacay, there was this crowd labor mentality, this shared role, work from home, side income, side hustle component. There was a new trust layer that Uber had really formed, where you're actually like really doing commercial engagements with people, strangers you don't know. We saw this happening, and we placed a series of companies kind of in the direction of that cultural wave, and a bunch of them didn't work, and two of them worked really, really effectively, right? So it was strategic in that we believe that culture is moving a certain way. And then we look for certain credentials of founders and ideas and products and services that might really benefit from the trend that culture's going. We're not going to move culture. Culture's moving in its own direction, but we can maybe place things that can kind of benefit from that movement. Yeah. I do not consider myself a cool guy. I love, it's a very nice compliment. I'm not the cool guy. If you meet the CEO of Liquid Death, he's a very cool guy. I think I'm very good at spotting cool guys. I'm not that cool guy. I go to bed at like 9:30 or 10 at night, and I don't even drink alcohol. I'm not a cool guy, right? But I think I can see where things are going and where culture's kind of moving. And if we can spot that and we can kind of put ourselves adjacent to it, sometimes we end up with really great moments.
As a side note, I also go to bed around 9:30 and don't drink alcohol. But I think we're pretty cool. We're cool guys, so we'll run with it. Right. So let's break it down for the really. Everyone who listens to the studio, aficionado, they know what's up. Yeah. You've had a series of funds. You've had an evolution of the structure of science, and some early wins. Wins early, and I think that's. Most people don't have that when they're starting a new studio, at least at the studio level. It might be in their past life. Can you walk us through, how like fund one went from 0 to X, and then how it led to fund two, and how you guys structured everything behind it, where the capital came from?
Yeah. And we've gone through a few different iterations structurally, as most studios have, and we've really learned from others. And now people, I think, are learning from us. Our first entity was really almost like a consolidated holding company. It really wasn't set up as a proper fund. It had some very complicated waterfall mechanics for investors, and everybody made money, and that's great. And they're going to make, frankly, a lot more money from it, which we're really happy about. But, we realized that studios in itself are really hard to fund. They're really hard to fund. And you really have to move, in our opinion, to a fund structure. So when we went from the first vehicle to the second, we moved to traditional fee and carry fund structure that kind of pairs with the studio. So every time we set up a new fund, we basically set up a new studio. That studio engages a whole bunch of our labor. Our labor kind of moves into that studio pool. We build a bunch of businesses, and then the fund has a really unique relationship with the studio where obviously it owns big portions of those companies. It has really preferred pricing. There's all these other specific things around it, but it gets us the first bite at the apple every time at a really unique price and unique size and scale, which we think benefits the investors disproportionately, which I think over time we obviously are proving it does.
Yeah.
And I think that for most people starting studios, they probably need to mimic this structure. I don't want to publish it publicly, but I definitely have a whole bunch of documents written around this, and I'm happy to share them with individuals trying to figure this out. Doing it as a consolidated holding company has both investor issues and major tax issues. And I would just say, we dodged some major bullets because I had some incredible partners that knew how to navigate these issues. But without that, we wouldn't be on our third vehicle. So I think getting it right at the beginning is really, really important. And getting it into a pool where you have repeatable, investable capital from investors is critical. Otherwise, you'll spend all your time fundraising, and that becomes really hard.
I remember a few years back, I was talking to a friend, Alper Solen. Pretty much anyone who's listening knows him or knows of him. And we were talking about how we're seeing a lot of studios have to almost, they create a vision of this is the ideal structure for us as GPs to build great ventures and to support our entrepreneurs. Yeah. There's a huge population that's left out of that conversation, which is, the LPs, who's going to actually fund this, and is this going to work for them? And if we can't get the capital, sure, none of this works in the first place. And when they pitched these models, it wasn't 2 and 20. It maybe even didn't have a fee or carry structure. It was a whole different story. They couldn't even get a meeting with the LPs. So then they have to keep going back to the drawing board and being this Frankenstein model just to get the meeting. And it was 2 and 20 just to get the LPs to say yes, but then it's messy. Yeah. Were you guys dealing with a similar scenario? And is that why you feel you got to move to a fund structure, or was it a different ballgame?
I mean, I think it was somewhat similar in that, the reality is that, if you think about the global pool of available investable capital, venture capital is the smallest sliver of this giant pie, yeah, right? And in the smallest sliver, we are the highest risk, potentially highest reward category, right? Yeah. And inside that sliver, there's a very small group of people that deploy, and they deploy into venture funds. And there's a bunch of big LPs that invest into this along with other things. And I think it's they pay their bills by putting money into the public markets, into the big private equity firms, and the tip of that bill is what they put into venture. This tiny amount, which is a bet to increase the return through just crazy stuff that venture capital gets the privilege of doing, right? If you go to this very tiny pool of investors and you're fighting over a tiny sliver of a small sliver of a big pool, and you show them something that doesn't fit everything else in the category, it's just too confusing.
You're not getting a meeting.
Yeah, and so it quickly became apparent to us that look, we're in the venture capital game. We need to be appealing to a lot of people in venture capital. We don't want to give them a structure that's going to get them fired because it doesn't follow the rules of all the other structures. So just make it normal. Just fit with everything else. Find a way to make it fit with everything else. Then you really can go and you can talk to a lot of people, and they know what they're looking at. They know how to quantify it. They know how to measure it. With Fund 1, we spent a lot of time trying to show people, or Vehicle 1, kind of how it was performing and how it was comparing to venture. But it spent a lot of time trying to convince them of it. And then economically, we showed them it did work, but it was a lot of discussion and it was too much explaining. And so when we went into Vehicle 2 and Fund 3, obviously we went to really standard structures, and we'll do the same thing for Vehicle 4, just to make it really easy for people to understand.
Yep. How'd you guys get your first meetings with your first investors ever? What was going on behind the scenes?
Well, so I had a group of investors that, I had relationships with. Maybe I had invested into deals with them, and, they'd known I, have built and sold companies. I'd run big companies. I advised companies. And so there's a lot of capital being hey, Mike, whatever you do next, let me know. And that was the same for Peter. And so when we came together, luckily we went to a network of individuals that were around us, and they were really, really kind to support us. And that was really the first capital coming in.
Got it. I'd love to shift gears a little bit to, the model today. And if you could, and there's always the same questions. For example, how many startups do you fund and incubate per year? How much equity do you take in each? You already answered some of these pieces. How do you find founders? I'd love for you to run through, the basics, the stuff that's like in the one pager of science, but more importantly, how and what in your journey over the last 15 almost years helped you get to those conclusions? Like, this is why we do X companies per year. This is why we take that much equity. Yeah, I mean, where would you start there?
Let's see. So we typically pace at around 8 to 10 new companies per year. Not all of them receive the full amount of funding that we kind of hold back for them. So our goal is, if it's not going to work, we want to find out early and we want to find out cheap, right? So
Mhm.
I'm happy to shut a company down after we've invested 75,000. I'm really happy if I've invested 2 million plus, right? So it's generally 8 to 10 companies per year. 8 to 10 companies per year typically fall within three general categories. It's CPG, kind of consumer goods, it's marketplace models, and it's mobile and social media, right? So everything we do basically falls in those buckets. Sometimes there's a little fintech here and there. We do almost no SaaS. So they kind of fall into things we know. The more deals we do in those sectors, the smarter we're getting. So we understand pattern recognition, both from a personality of the founder, operational style of the founder, founding team, but also the market that we're going into, exit potentials, fundraising pacing, etc. So we became, we continue to be experts at our categories, which I think is really, really important. And really the benefit of a studio is that you're becoming an expert. I would argue the more diversity you do across different categories as a studio, the higher likelihood of failure is. So you
100%.
really want to narrow down. From an ownership perspective, we want large minority positions. What does that mean? It can just depend on the company. If a company's walking through the door and they're already doing $250,000 a month in revenue versus a company coming through the door with a prototype and a PowerPoint pitch, it's going to be different structures. We model out the companies based on how many rounds of financing they think they need and what our ownership position will be in the end and how much we can pro rata into those rounds so we can really hit our kind of core fund returns. We go in with wide open eyes, understanding that 8 of 10 investments will probably warrant 0 to 1. And the two, that are the critical ones, that'll be the 5, 10, 50, 200x or whatever it's going to be. We really need to lean heavily into those. So, and I tell you that from a pattern perspective, doing it over 11 or 12 years, it's pretty much kind of followed that exact same routine.
Yep. Between Liquid Death and Dollar Shave Club and Rover, and you have a big portfolio. Those are some of the big ones. It looks like from the outside that pretty much everything you guys touch turns to gold when it comes to storytelling, media, earned media, virality, stuff like that. I asked a friend yesterday, hey, I'm talking to Mike Jones tomorrow. Like, what do you want to ask him? What would you want to hear from Mike? And he says, I want to know how he makes everything go viral. And as a marketer, I'm like, oh God, like, don't ask that question. But I got to ask you, like, do you have a formula here?
I mean, first off it's like the formula is find really great CEOs that know marketing and then give them a lot of room to run, right? So, both Mike Dubin and Mike Cisneros are like completely world-class, best of breed marketers, hands down. Liquid Death's Travis Barker campaign and the original video shot by, Mike Dubin for Dollar Shave Club, these were not our ideas. Like, we weren't at the shoots, so what I would say from a kind of more advisory board, like, let's think about how we do this level. Big budgets don't create viral campaigns. I would argue we get the least virality when we spend the most money.
Interesting.
So when I come across founders and they're talking about, the vendors they're going to hire and the agencies that are going to do great work, I'm not a believer. I would say great marketing and great branding, especially in this product sector, it comes from the CEO. It's in the DNA of the company. Although maybe the execution might be outsourced, the true fire of it comes from within the person. And so I can identify when we are sitting with that person. I can identify that they have the potential of creating something like that. I can also identify when I'm not sitting with that person, and I know what that's going to do. Yeah. When we don't have that person, and let's say we're still in the business with them, we do a lot around measured approaches to virality. We do a lot with weighing really heavy into TikTok, weighing heavy into Instagram, Facebook. We do a lot of internal tools and technologies around finding ways to push stuff to become viral. We have a bunch of partnerships that are maybe best of breed or maybe even unique access to us that might allow things to go viral. So if I have a good, Tinder or a good flame, like, we can probably magnify it very effectively. In Liquid Death's case, they've been able to do that without us. Like
Yeah.
we help here and there, but the reality is that team's just unbelievable at what they do. I'm glad that we spotted it. I'm glad that we get a benefit from it. Hopefully, maybe we added something along the way to them. But the reality is, like, they're just very talented people.
Yeah.
I would generally say, though, that the biggest red flag is like it's got to come from within. You know, I can't take somebody that's out of B school and they're talking about a market size opportunity and turn them into somebody that's going to create a Dollar Shave Club video over the weekend. Like they're kind of just different people in a certain sense. And so if we're going to something that requires big brand and big marketing, we need that person at the core of the company.
So I love that. Even in a formula of itself is like we're some of the best in the world at spotting the best marketers. How do you find the best marketers?
Well, luckily, and I think in venture it's true, it's like success brings more of the same, right? So if somebody thinks they've got the next Dollar Shave Club, like they often come to us and they're like, we want to replicate that journey or liquid death, whatever. Yeah. And so it's funny because I was with somebody the other day and they've known me for probably 25 years and they're like, why aren't you building software? Like, aren't you the software guy? You were building like social software like before MySpace. Like, what are you doing? Like you're funding a candy company, you have a beverage business. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, gosh, I kind of don't know, I love building software, but the reality is our early wins, basically brought a flood of CEOs and founders that want to follow in the similar footsteps, including pets. Like we see a ton of pet startups all the time because Rover had such a big exit and we were such a big part of the early Dollar Shave or dog vacay story. So, that's just kind of the direction it goes, is like, luckily we keep getting better and better people come to us. And what's nice is we're really good at working with talent. I think my whole career, I've actually done a pretty good job of being able to work with talented people, something I actually think I'm good at because I think they're so much more talented than me. I want to enable them to go fulfill their dreams. So I love working with artists and creative individuals and see what we can do to wrap my very structural business mind around their very creative vision and come up with beautiful things. So, if those people come to us and we can do it with them, that's great. Like I love them at the core. I want artists at the core of our companies for sure on the consumer side.
Totally. I love that. I think there's a conversation that needs to be had more right now, which is with the advent of AI and how cheap it is to fund things and how easy and fast and cheap it is to build things.
Yeah.
Well, the differentiator, the competitive advantage is no longer in technology. It's going to be in the brand and the founder story. And I love that quote, which is we need more artists at the center of these companies,
100%.
Especially.
That's right. You're right.
Especially in B2B. Yeah.
Totally.
Things are just so soulless and you see the same thing over and over and over and over again. I got to ask from a high level, you look at trends, you guys are, you're almost trend forecasters in a sense. You have to be. Yeah. What do you like right now? Where do you think things are going? January of 2024 is when we're having this conversation, both from a culture, zeitgeist, but also tech startup and venture standpoint.
Well, let's see. I learned. I love to be a student of trends. I consume a lot of media to understand those trends, and then I also spend a lot of time with my kids, right, and with young people on where the trends are going, right. The trends that are hitting that surprise me, like the kind of thrift clothing movement, really surprises me. The fact that my daughter in New York wants to spend all weekend thrifting, and that's an entire activity for them. And they are price insensitive. They want bespoke, one-off, personalized. I think the second piece that surprises me is the other day I spent an immense amount of time with college kids talking about old digital cameras. And what I realized is they don't want high fidelity. They want low fidelity. When they take a picture, they don't want to take it with their phone. They want to take it from a camera from 2000.
Yeah.
They want to see the grain. They want to feel. So I think that there's this individualization that continues to kind of grow in America. Yeah. I think there's a pull away from the super high fidelity, everything's absolutely perfect moment. I think it's actually probably pretty good for society. I think AI's imagery perfection will actually push this more. There'll be more individualization, more differentiation. Mm-hmm. Which I think is going to be super interesting. I also wonder whether AI's showing of the perfect face and the perfect body, and as that infiltrates pornography and media, if there'll be a greater acceptance of true individualization and differentiation around body type and beauty. I think that's super fascinating. Yeah. I like I really like trends where we celebrate the uncelebrated individuals. I think they're super interesting there. I think that's absolutely great. I think there's a full realization on the negative mental health aspects of social media and the bullying behaviors.
Yeah. You hear that noise?
Yeah.
That's my dog ripping at
Oh,
his
nice.
crate right now because he wants to hang out. But I'll leave that in for our audience so they get some
Sure.
sense of authenticity here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So I think, yeah, I think I think there's a big push to individualization that I love. And I think that goes down to the brands you buy, the clothing you purchase, who makes it, all that stuff. I think there is a bit of greenwashing still out there. I think LPs are still confused about the DEI stuff. I think
Yeah.
that we haven't seen market rewards around that stuff, but I think that there's a generation rising up with it that wants personalization and bespoke components to their identity that I think are really, really unique.
Yeah. Do you think that there's much of a conversation amongst VCs and in the actual venture market around these trends?
No, because I think the general typical venture capitalist isn't the type of person that's paying attention to those trends. I think that there's like a huge gravity towards SaaS, right? Why? It's really easy to measure.
Good
It's really
margins.
easy. It's not easy to understand, easy to benchmark. Big clients, super predictable, right? Almost not necessarily always sellable, but at a certain level, high likelihood of M&A. When you look at consumer, it's a harder sector because if you don't make it, it's a zero, right? There's not that many consumer, talent buys anymore. So I think venture generally gets scared of stuff that feels like it's fully trend driven. They need a lot of data to kind of support it because they maybe don't feel like they're qualified to be spotting those trends.
Yeah.
So there's a certain sensitivity to it that I haven't seen as much. There's obviously a group of consumer investors we really respect that we bring into a lot of our deals, and they see that and they can lean into it. But it's like if you think about the early days of pitching Liquid Death, imagine you're a VC and I'm like, yeah, I think there's an anti-plastic movement, and I think that there's an under-recognized population that would like to buy a beverage brand and they're not going to connect to Celsius water and they're not, or whatever Celsius, and they're not going to connect into Red Bull and they want something better. And it's called Liquid Death and an aluminum can with water. I mean, the faces we would have gotten, like, that didn't connect to a big group of investors in the early days.
Totally. Well, I'm curious, like Mike Jones, as a human, you've had quite a few chapters. You're certainly in a chapter now and have a few chapters ahead. I mean, tell us about where you're at today and what's coming next for you and for science and for the work that you want to be doing.
That's a really good question. I think about that a lot. During COVID, the team moved remote, and that's worked really, really effectively. I really do miss in person. I would wish I could bring all my companies back to our original headquarters, but our companies, want to maintain the remote status. I moved to Aspen during COVID because we had a place out here in LA was feeling kind of difficult, and one of my kids graduated from high school here, and I have another kid in high school here. So that's great. And it's a whole other way to look at the US in a little bit because we get a whole different population here. I travel around the US a lot more than I used to. I think like completely operating inside Los Angeles, it is a very unique bubble in itself. Aspen's also a bubble, but if you go do a weekend in Arkansas, you might see a bit of a different part of America. And I think it's been really healthy for me to see more than just the Los Angeles viewpoint because I've been in Los Angeles for 20 plus years, right? And especially kind of West LA. So for me, that's been really positive. I love replacing my 2-hour commute in LA with physical activity. So I'm outside a lot more, which is great. I talk to a lot more people, which is great. I spend a lot of time in front of a computer, but I spend a lot of time face to face, hearing different things and coming up with different ideas. So I'm a big fan of that change for me. For science, I like what we do. I like who we do it with, and I think our performance is phenomenal. So I don't wake up being like, something's broken, we gotta fix it. I kind of wake up being like, I feel really blessed I get to do more of this today. Let's do more of this today. Yeah. I think like every venture capitalist, especially after you've had some wins, it's like, I want bigger wins. Like sold a company for $1 billion. Okay, now let's get to 2.4 billion. Oh, can we go bigger? Can we go bigger? Can we go bigger? Right? And that changes the way we select companies a little bit. It changes the way we look at founders. There's definitely changes the way we deploy capital. So, I think we're getting our stride now on reaching larger. Liquid Death is part of that. Let's reach large here. Let's like really push for something that's going to be staying versus something that's going to get acquired and kind of like swallowed in by the mass. But I can't say there's any fundamental changes in our strategy. I want to do it more. I like working with small funds. I like working with LPs that know what we do. I like to send them free cool stuff they understand. I like them to drink our drinks and eat our food and wear our hats, and I want them to feel great about it, and I want to show them a bunch of money on the back of it. So,
Yeah.
and I would say I would like to do some more software stuff. So like we are playing now with a little bit more software stuff. We're always have experiments and kind of social software, but as you know, that's a tough game.
Yeah. I think as an entrepreneur, I haven't made it yet. I'm certainly not at the like, oh, we sold something for $1 billion. Now let's go 2 billion. But I do constantly jump back and forth between the scarce mindset and abundance mindset. It sounds like based
Mm-hmm.
off what you just said, waking up every day and being like, I just want to keep doing what we're doing. It's going great. I'm grateful that we even have this abundance mindset versus the other, which is like things are broken. We got to get out of bed and like go fix shit. Scarce mindset. Was there a moment in time where that switched for you, or have you always been that guy?
Well, I'm definitely a glasses half full guy. So like I definitely kind of believe that either you change your attitude or you change your situation. Like there's really just two questions. You're unhappy with something, feel differently about it or change what's going on. Like I'm not one to complain at all, right?
Yeah.
Um, definitely venture is a mind game because the majority of what you're going to spend time on is not going to work, right? It's just really is not, right? It's
Yeah.
venture. You have to rely a little bit in numbers and believe, well, if I do 12 things, one should work, two should work, three should work. If I do two things, who knows? So you have to keep that pipeline filled. And you have to realize that like every failure is knowledge for you. So when you learn, you just got to learn and just make sure you don't learn it a second time. We're in the middle of a deal right now and there's enough red flags that I'm like, I think we learned this lesson before and we lost a bunch of money. And I think we don't want to learn that lesson again. And we have a lot of invested time into this decision, and we're going to have to make this decision to probably not pursue this. We've been working on it for 8, 9 months. So it's a lot of invested time. It's a lot of invested money, but I can't learn this lesson again. Like I have to rely on my knowledge set. So I turn failures into lessons. The only real failure is if I fail twice on the same lesson. Then I have
Yeah.
not listened to myself. But it is a tough mind game because you do recognize that a lot of your time is spent with stuff that won't work. And that is difficult, right? And in a certain sense, you feed your winners and you have to kind of starve your losers, which feels a little opposite because you think, no, you got to feed the losers to make them, fat and healthy. It's like, well, that's kind of not the way venture works. It's like your winners, you have to pile all your money into them. You have to get massive returns off your winners because they have to pay for your losers. And if you have stuff that really isn't showing good growth, again, until they've changed something, their mindset or their situation, it's kind of the same old, right?
Yeah. Over the years, you've consistently done a lot of contrarian things. I mean, building a studio, that's pretty contrarian early. That's pretty contrarian in and of itself. Moving from
Right.
software to like making canned water and like
Yeah.
selling razors on the internet. I mean,
Yeah.
contrarian things. What have been some, big defining moments of like when someone either pushed back, told you no, said it was stupid? I'm sure there were quite a few. Would love to hear, like, take us into that moment, what happened, and then how'd you get through it?
Let's see. So, I mean, certainly during the Liquid Death story, there was a bunch of people that were like, "This is the stupidest idea I've ever seen in my life. Thanks, but no thanks." So we got a bunch of those. On those cases, I think our position was just like, "Look, we believe, we think we're smarter than you, and so we're just going to go." I think with there was a country when I took on the role with MySpace. I had an investor, or I had an advisor really, who was like, you're going to fail hard, but you'll probably learn a lot, but it's going to be miserable, you know? And I remember being like, you're probably not wrong, but I think I have to go through it, you know? And there would have been a lot of easier paths than what we did there. That was incredibly difficult. I'm actually quite proud of what we did, but it obviously didn't work to the way that we were hoping. So that was a contrarian decision for sure of being like, look, I'm going to do something everyone thinks I shouldn't do, but I'm going to become really smart because of it. And we're going to take a few years and we're going to learn some lessons, and we're going to teach some lessons. And so that worked really, really well. I think when we started science, there was a bunch of people that said, hey, you should definitely just go join a firm, become a standard venture capitalist. The best thing is you can just like not work Fridays and you can just just be done at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's no big deal. And I was at this point in my life, I'm like, I don't want that. Like I wake up early. I like working. Like I feel great about it. Like I'm not sure what I'd be doing if I wasn't working. Like I'm pretty excited about working every day. And so I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it. They're like, oh, the studio is so hard. You're all these like co-founding responsibilities and all these people, and you're in their business. You have to worry about their finances. You have to worry about the growth. If you're VC, you just, board updates, no big deal. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's hard, but for me, it's more rewarding, right?
Yeah.
So there's a few points where I don't know if I would define it as fully contrarian, but it's like I realized that the decision for me wasn't the same decision for everybody else. And what motivated me and what made me feel like I was doing my purpose in life was maybe a harder journey than others, but I was going to enjoy it. And maybe there was other ways I could have made more money faster or made more money easier, but still, like, I wouldn't feel as fulfilled every day. And so
Yeah.
I like the grind. Like, I still like it. Maybe at some point I won't. Maybe we'll talk in 3 years and like, oh, screw it. Like, I'm living in
Yeah.
Bali now, and I can go like work once a week or something and deploy my capital.
Yeah.
But that's not really what I was looking for.
I think there's a reason I've always connected so much with other action sports people, because I think of it as
Mm.
like the equivalent is being like, why would you go on the black diamond trails? Like the green ones are so much easier. It's like
Yeah,
because the black diamond ones are the fun trails. That's where it's fun. And then when I'm done, I can look back and be like, yeah, I probably got hurt more, like
yeah.
lost a few limbs, maybe killed a few brain cells along the way, but like, damn, I'm pretty fulfilled with the trails I've conquered. That was a hell of a journey. And just sit on the
I
green
connect
trails all
so
day.
much with what you just said. So
Yeah.
the nice part of being in Aspen is it's filled with athletes, and I spend
Yeah.
all my time with athletes, pro athletes, Olympians, 80-year-old hobbyist athletes. I spend my
Yeah.
time with them, and when we go try to do something hard, we make that choice. We don't have to do it. We choose to do hard things, and I feel really good after we've accomplished something hard. And I might look back on it and be like, I'm never going to do that hard thing again. That was too damn hard. But to your point, like, I go up to the mountain all the time. I love the mountains. I love it if I'm on a bike. I like it if I'm on a road bike, a mountain bike. I like hiking through them, and I like riding them on snowboards. And at the end of the day, like, I choose to do hard things, right? And I think it makes me better, and I think it makes me smarter, and it makes me physically fit, and it gives me good mental challenges. So you're right. Like, I'm not interested in the easy path. There's a lot of people following that easy path that I think are going to have very difficult, long lives. I'm much more interested in taking a tougher path.
Totally. I think the reason this is such an important topic for this show, startup studios, and actually I'll digress for a second. I'm not going to show it on camera. And so for anyone watching or anyone listening, I've got a double black diamond tattoo, pretty big on my right bicep since I was 21
Nice.
years old. And it's
Yeah.
this constant reminder of like, yeah, look, I love to snowboard, I love to mountain bike, I love to surf, used to skateboard. It's just like, that's my life. But it's this reminder of like, do the hard thing. You learn more, you grow more, you feel more. It's just a cooler story. It's your life, it's your
Yeah.
memoir. And in
Yeah.
studio world, all of us, whether we're new or just doing this for 6 months, we've been in it for like you for 15 years. I've been in it for like 7. We hear every day like studio, it's so hard. Like
Yeah.
don't even try. And even I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you haven't raised all this money or like sold a company, like you shouldn't do this. It's too hard.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. And yet for some reason, we're like cut from this cloth where choosing the hardest possible thing, the riskiest possible thing in the hardest possible industry, which is VC, in the riskiest possible space, going after impossible
Yeah.
things. And we're stoked about it. And I like that. I'm curious,
Yeah.
are you looking? I think it takes one to know one. Like you can kind of spot other people who get it, sort of like, oh, like I just can look at something like, yeah, you know what it's like to like ride your bike up a 7,000 foot mountain and before, under freezing temperatures. You could spot them from a mile away. Do you bring that into spotting founders and people to do deals with?
Well, I think, and it's a pretty classic same with venture. You have to find people that are fueled by passion, not by logic, because it's not logical to start companies. It's a high failure rate, easier ways to make money, right? So it's like you do look for people that are doing it for a purpose, like they're purpose driven in what they're going to do. They're bringing a personal reason to it. They're bringing a passion to it. They have a drive. It's a never say die mentality. They're always going to find their way through it. I remember one of my founders, when we invested in her, she was just coming back from China and she's like, oh yeah, I worked at 996. And I was like, oh, what was that? She's like 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And she had done it for a few years in China. And I was like, wow, like that's impressive. Like the grind. And, it's like you do have to have people that bring that to it. It's also why a lot of times founders are younger because they don't have the concerns over kids and bedtime and they want to grind and they want to put in their hours on stuff. That doesn't always obviously warrant great results. And obviously we have older founders that are also successful as well. But, it definitely has to be somebody that's looking to do difficult things and really take on difficult missions. And they're not going to bail at adversity because at the end of the day, there's going to be bad days. There's going to be bad months and bad quarters and you got to work your way through it and it's going to be hard. And you have to take a bunch of personal risks to do it. And if you have people that are too in the head and they're not really willing to do that stuff, it's why, frankly, like some of our great founders are ex-athletes and ex-military because they're used to really going through very difficult situations and they'll get to the end.
Totally. Well, we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to kind of start to wrap up a little bit. I mean, let's talk
Yeah.
about studio life again. So, if you were to launch a new studio today,
Mhm.
how would you structure it? How would you set it up? How much of this would look a lot like science right now, and how much would be actually kind of unique and novel?
I mean, I think structurally we would do the same thing we do now, which is a fund and studio pairing with a standard economic structure for LPs. I think there's sectors that really work well for studios. I actually think SaaS is a great sector for studios because you can consolidate a bunch of the sales resources. It's like if you and I said, okay, we're gonna let's say that we're gonna do 10 ventures and they all rely on outbound call teams. We can create one epic world-class outbound call team and probably fuel them across 10 different startups, right? So like I think I would find, I would find probably growth slash sales resources we can consolidate and then basically plant a whole garden of companies around that resource
Mm.
so that we have a unique and distinctive advantage for our companies so they can basically find growth at low to no cost because the studio is enduring the cost for the kind of core growth team. I like that kind of synergistic structure where it disproportionately advantages your companies through kind of a consolidated resource bay. I like that a lot. I think there's areas you could do that. I think you could do it in medical, you could do it in consumer, you could do it with apps, you could do it with SaaS for sure. You could absolutely do it with fintech. You could probably really do well with fintech. I think that works well in regulated industries really, really effectively. And then I also think there's certain geographies that would work really, really well. Like I think there's going to be a ton of M&A in India in particular. And I think that there's not the same level of talent there as there probably is on the West Coast of the US for developing and building these things, and a great on the ground studio team with that kind of consolidated resource methodology would probably build some real monsters down there. That gets me kind of excited. But I think the key here is, in order, I think, to be effective as a studio, you need incredible talent at the studio level. They have to know, so many components of what a founder is going to need through the journey. And where I get fearful is I find some people starting studios that haven't really been through building effective companies. Oh, sorry, a second. And my concern is they're giving bad advice. So like, I think when you're taking an advisory role in any company, whether it's a studio structure or otherwise, if you give bad advice, you can kill companies. And so I get worried when people are like, I'm starting a studio, but I've never built a company. I've never sold a company. I don't know what it is to have staff. I've never hired people. I haven't raised money, but we're going to do a studio. I'm like, that sounds hard. Like, so when people come to me being like, I want to do that, I'm like, go join a startup, build a company, succeed or fail, go get a bunch of knowledge that when you come and young founders come to you, you're really coming to them with experienced stage advice, not
Yeah.
just like, oh, let's figure it out together, right? Because I don't think that's what founders need.
Yeah, 100%. Are you up for a quick speed round here?
Sure.
All right. First question is, what is the coolest tech tool that you've come across recently that's had a pretty drastic impact on your workflow and your tech stack?
Let's see. I mean, I'm not sure it's had a drastic impact, but like I started using the Facebook Meta glasses when I'm like snowboarding and cycling to get like pictures and videos.
Mm.
Pretty cool. Like
That is the
it's
first
cooler than
time
I
I've
thought it
heard
would be.
that.
I know, like I didn't Snapchat sent me their glasses when they first came out, and I wasn't going to wear these like yellow. It just wasn't going to be realistic for me. But I'm on the mountain so much, and I'm outside so much, and I'm with people, and I like not touching my phone. I really don't want to touch my phone because if I'm taking a picture with my phone, there's going to be all these alerts and all these Slack messages and all this crap to deal with.
Yeah.
And so suddenly I start using these glasses. I'm like, oh my god, like I kind of like this. Like I think I could actually get some. I think I could almost get back into photography through not touching my phone with these glasses. The speakers are like weirdly good. I mean, like I'm not paid by Facebook. I bought these just like everybody else. There's no discount code for me. Like, and I got them, and I'm like, God, I kind of like them. Like, and I'm really surprised. And I'm going heli snowboarding on Saturday. And trust me, dude, I'm taking the glasses. Like, it's gonna be super fun. They won't let me take a drone up there, but they'll let me take glasses, and so I'll get a bunch of footage and see how it is. They keep shutting down when I get below like 5 degree operating temperatures, but
Yeah.
for most of the sunny days, it's actually okay.
Sure.
So I don't know. That's been kind of a fun toy recently.
Yep. Second speed round question that I'm going to now inject here is, where are you going heli skiing this weekend?
We're going to Silverton with like a group of other, kind of investors that we put together. X Games is in town this weekend, so there's a whole bunch of
Yep.
snowboard activities, which is super fun.
Yep. Awesome. I gifted to a close friend of mine a heli drop at Silverton this season as a thank you for
Nice.
something he helped me out with. And he's like,
Oh,
"Oh,
that's
this is
great.
awesome." He's like, "I've done it before. I might just use it for like a day on the mountain without the heli." I was like, "Dude, the heli. Come on, that was the
Do
gift."
that. Yeah, it'd be
Um,
incredible.
next question is top 3 books that you think founders and/or new studio leaders should read this year.
I'm not good at that. I started reading Rick Rubin with the creative. What is it called? The
It's like
creative what?
the creative mind or
Artist
something
way.
like that.
Creative mind.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
keep
I
hearing
love
about
it
it
a
on
lot.
TikTok. Okay,
It's pretty good. I bought it maybe like 6 months. My daughter bought it for me 6 months ago, and I found her reading it. And I was like, oh, I like this.
yep. All right, last speed round question is, what's the best question you've been asked recently?
I think the best question I've been asked in all time is basically I found that great founders get secrets from me. So I kind of go into every conversation thinking, okay, here's a person. They know something that's a secret to like growth, success, happiness, business, relationships. They have some secret and they don't want to give up that secret. And so I think the best founders come to me and they're like, tell me one of the secrets of identifying talent, hiring somebody, building a company, whatever it is. And they drill into that unsaid thing that no one wants to tell you. And I think everybody has that. And so a lot of times when I'm with people that I really admire what they've done, I'm digging for that question. So it's
Mm,
not like a singular question. It's more like believing that you yourself have something really secret inside you that drove you to compete, that drove you to kind of do what you're doing in business. And if I can figure that out, it's like a secret that maybe I can use in my life. So I'm interested in that question.
that's fantastic, Mike. It was a real pleasure to have you today, and we had a little bit more of a personal episode here, which is really cool. I'm excited to hear how the
Yeah.
audience reacts to it. Where can people find you? What's the call to action?
My the science website is science-inc.com. I'm M Jones on Twitter and probably most platforms. I respond to most emails. I, respond to most tweets. Like I'm online if I'm not on the mountain. So I'm pretty available.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.